I get the feeling sometimes that there's sort of this underlying unspoken thing that someone's making off with a lot of money. And no one is making off with a lot of money here.
Running on a dark, unfolding road, the one that stole the eye. Following the faded frames of old, the blindly fade denied.
Okay, welcome to the 3% Podcast. This is Chad Post from Open Letter, and I'm here with Tom Roberge from Albertina New Directions, and our special guest this week is Alex Zucker, translator from the Czech and the co-chair of the translation committee at Penn. Alex, I'll let you talk in a second and explain a bit about the translation committee and also why we had you on. But in brief, this is in reference, I think, to one of our episodes 3 or 4 ago in which we talked about translators not being dock workers. So you want to take it from there, Alex? Tell us about the Penn Translation Committee, and tell us about your grand plan for reviving and revitalizing the way that translators are treated and paid in America.
Sure. That's very well said. So my co-chair, first of all, in the Penn America Translation Committee is Margaret Carson, and we've been serving together since June, and I'm just going to read you straight up what it says here from the penn.org/translation site, which is where people can go to find out more about our work. The Penn America Translation Committee advocates on behalf of literary translators, working to foster a wider understanding of their art and offering professional resources for translators, publishers, critics, bloggers, and others with an interest in international literature. So, one of the most important and unique things that the Translation Committee does is that we have a model contract on the website. It's penn.org/model-contract. It's also linked to off the penn.org translation page. And the model contract is a project that originated back in 1971. I'm sorry, let me just check that. 1981.
We don't have a lot of abiding by facts on this podcast, so
okay.
You can make that year whatever you want it to be.
Yes, but the fact checkers, I used to work at magazines, and I know the fact checkers are out there right now Googling as I speak. So, no, 1981 was the first model contract that the Penn Translation Committee put together, which is, our idea of what a model contract is. A model contract, our model of what a contract should look like for literary translators. And some of the things that we consider most important are that the copyright belongs to the translator, that the translator's name appears on the title page, on the cover, that when the translators receive the royalties that they're due, that there is a reversion clause on the copyright. So if the book goes out of print, the copyright reverts to the translator. This is important when we do a lot of us are discovering authors earlier in their career. They may not be big the first time a book is published, but then they get rediscovered, and their later books come out, but the first book can end up dead with a small publisher that doesn't exist anymore because the rights didn't revert to the translator. I mean, these are kind of details, but these are the kinds of things that are important to us as translators. The podcast that I commented on, and to say this, Tom, I was really trying to be sort of a provocateur there, but I just thought it was funny that the two of you were responding to this article or this comment by John O'Brien, I guess, in an article, and Tom was saying, you can correct me, Tom, I don't remember exactly what you said, something about how it wasn't right to compare us to dock workers. Translators weren't dock workers, and I said, well, maybe we should be because they get paid more than we do. So I just, as a little example, did a blog post where I said if I figured out what my hourly rate would be for sort of a typical project, that my pay would end up being less than a dock worker's. And what is the difference between translators and dock workers? And that's that dock workers have a union and we don't. So again, I really was just trying to be sort of a provocateur there. We do have a couple of associations that we can belong to as literary translators. There's the American Literary Translators Association. Mm-hmm. There's the American Translators Association, which has a literary division. and there's the Authors Guild, which we can belong to as well. Of those three, and then there is PEN, of course, although PEN is founded as an organization in defense of free expression in 1921, I believe. So it's initially a human rights organization, but in this country, the defense of translators' contract rights up until now has so far fallen mainly to the PEN Translation Committee. But we don't have lawyers at our disposal. The Authors Guild does. So if you want a contract to be reviewed in advance of signing it to see whether it works in your favor or not, if you're a member of the Authors Guild, they'll do that for you for free. PEN doesn't offer that service to any of its members, whether you're a translator or other type of author. So that's sort of the background of why I wanted to come and talk to you guys. There was one other thing. Feel free to stop me at any time, by the way. I'm just going on here. But there was one other point that came up on the podcast that I thought was important to address because it's become sort of an urban legend in the world of literary translation, and that's this idea that we can't discuss rates with each other. And this dates back to a case in the early 90s. The American Translators Association was actually investigated by the Federal Trade Commission because of discussions on their listserv about translation rates. The investigation went on from December 1990 to sometime in 1994. There was never a finding in the investigation, but it cost the ATA an arm and a leg, or maybe a couple arms and an eyeball in legal fees. It was apparently about $250,000.
Cost them like 7 translators.
It cost them like 7 translators.
Just swap them in.
Yeah. So, I don't know what the ATA's budget is, but I can imagine that must have been pretty crippling. And so as a result, the ATA became very conscientious about, and really they issued a policy statement, and all the members were really warned against talking about rates on their listserv. But of course, there's a difference between mentioning rates and fixing prices. Fixing prices is illegal. Talking about rates is not illegal.
Right.
I've heard people at Alta conferences in a panel say, somebody says, well, I make this much. And, you can't talk about that. Of course we can talk about that. I mean, there are many translators out there who post their rates on their websites. The FTC is not out there snooping around trying to find translators sitting in a coffee shop at an Alta conference talking about how much they make, So I think it's really important for translators not to be paranoid. But, to me, the main protection of a guild is not so much in the rates, but in the types of contracts that are offered to us initially. So a lot of publishing houses have a really basic contract that they come out with, and often the editor is bringing it out and doesn't even know that there are other versions of it. The editor is not the legal person. But the main thing with it, as a translator, I want other translators to know is that these are negotiable documents, and we have a right to negotiate them. There are other issues besides the amount of money. There's the issue of royalties. There's the issue of whether the copyright is registered in our name. There's the issue of whether our name is on the cover, whether it's on the title page, this sort of thing. As I mentioned in the copy that goes along with the book when it's publicized, these are all contract issues. I'm going
to interrupt you for 2 seconds just to read my favorite part of this. This is from the PEN model contract. The translator's name shall appear on the cover and title page of all editions of the book and in all publicity and advertising copy released by the publisher wherever the author's name appears. That all is what you just said, which is fine. This is the part that I like.
60%.
In a type size not smaller than 60% of that of the author's name.
Yes. I don't know how that was arrived at.
Yeah, how did you get to 60 exactly?
I wasn't around when that was negotiated, but I have sent it to publishers, and they have agreed.
I'm just trying to look at a book here to see if I can even judge if it's 60%.
I don't know.
No.
I've never taken out a I don't know what I would use to measure that with.
Yeah, I'm just grabbing random books that are on my desk. I'm just curious about that. Anyways, go on. So yeah, so like you're talking about more the rights and less of the
Rates,
money.
but there is one thing I do want to give as an example of a way that translators, an organization working on behalf of translators, whether it's the Penn Translation Committee, whether it's an Authors Guild, whatever form it takes, can influence rates in a totally legal way. And the way it's being done right now, for instance, in the UK, is that the Translators Association, which is a group within the Society of Authors. The Society of Authors in the UK is the equivalent of the Authors Guild in the United States. The Translators Association has as a here. Let me read you the language. This is what they say. The negotiation of fees is a matter for the individual translator and client to resolve. In the Society's experience of reviewing contracts, we have found that UK publishers are prepared to pay in the region of £88.5 per thousand words. Translators may also find it useful to note the payment model used by independent publishing house and other stories. So they also use this publishing house and other stories as a model in general of their practices. So what they're doing is saying, we have found that publishers are prepared to pay this. So it's sort of a suggested best practice. Mm-hmm. That's coming from the Society of Authors, which includes this Translators Association, and there's no reason that an organization here couldn't also do that. The way that this is put into practice, in addition, is that the English Penn Writing and Translation Awards, when they are given out, publishers apply for those, and they are, I don't know if they're bound, but it definitely, when they apply, it says this is the rate that we recommend. So it's like a lever saying if you want to get a grant from English Penn, you better be prepared to pay this rate. So that's just one example of a way that having a kind of recommended rate can influence in a positive way how much translators are paid.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of how that could work in the U.S. Because we don't have grants really.
Yeah, well,
except for NEA, but like that impacts like the large number, but not everyone.
The NEA, for instance, when it makes a grant to Open Letter, could say could attach as either a recommendation or a stipulation that well, how much did you get last year? Whatever amount you got. If you want to get a grant from the NEA to support publishing of translations, you have to pay your translators a minimum of 12 cents a word. Which is crazy, and I would actually be offended by that one, since the vast majority of the publishers, or there are a good number of them of translations that are being published by nonprofits, but there's also a lot of publishers that are not nonprofits that don't get grants from the NEA that would be doing translations. New Directions being one of them. Exactly. So there would be regulations against us. The lowest of the capitalized organizations, or the lowest branch, the least capitalized in general of the publishing tiers, but not against anyone else. Why is that against you, though? Because it would be coming from the money that you're getting from the NEA. Yeah, but it would be a regulation that would be dictating what we would have to do, which someone else wouldn't have to do. And that money from the NEA goes to all costs related to those books, not just the translators. That money doesn't go to just the translators by any means. Yeah. Well, I mean, I would just say you have to weigh the question of what is in a publisher's best interest financially versus what is in the interest of the long-term sustainability of literature and literary translation. Because if translators can't make a living translating, then fewer of us are going to do it. If we're not translating as much, we're not going to be as good. In the United States, most translators have other jobs because the rates are relatively low here. That does have an impact on what kind of translator you get. A writer who's writing full-time is generally going to be a better writer than somebody who's working a day job and just squeezing it in their free time. I'm not saying there have never been any writers who have been good who squeeze it in their free time, but, it's a question of priorities, I guess.
Tom, I feel like you have to speak now. Okay, go on.
I was going to say that I think Chad's dislike of the regulation is exactly that. It's a dislike of regulations in general, and
Right.
that capitalism largely works without them, unless you're talking tax and that sort of thing. But how business is conducted, apart from very basic equality safeguards, is largely unfettered. Especially, they're more. What I'm trying to say is they're more geared towards the consumer. We get fair prices. There's this whole internet thing where Time Warner can't charge us an arm and a leg for capped internet and that sort of thing, and then hiring practices. And I guess this translation thing would fall under a hiring practice, but the laws that exist, the regulations that exist, are largely about you have to treat all employees fairly. You can't discriminate against handicapped. You can't discriminate against minorities, et cetera, et cetera. This, like the rates you pay, even though it's a nonprofit, it just seems, I agree with Chad, it's a little harsh to sort of impose and insist on something when the truth is these are the people most likely to already be meeting this minimum standard to begin with. And it's like, I don't like the implication that they don't know how to handle this sort of thing, or they don't know what their own mission is, or they don't know, what's good for the rest of their business. And I understand, look, they're the NEA is giving out a lot of money, and it's, it comes with strings. It's just the strings can be a little insulting, I think.
What is the I had a thought experiment for a second. I'm not sure where this would go, of like how much money would end up resulting from the publication of a book in translation, and how that money would get split to people, to see like where this rate works and doesn't work, which would be kind of curious to me. But more importantly, Alex, since you and I talk about this, what is your going rate?
My going rate? I'll take as much as I can get. I mean, look, I'm not an absolutist. I mean, I work for different rates depending on who's hiring me. I will say the most that I've been paid by a publisher up to now has been 15 cents a word.
So 150 1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I work for an individual, I generally ask for more than that and generally get it because, they don't have an individual is not publishing a book. They're asking me to translate a work, and then they're doing something with it. I don't know. I'm doing a book right now for a publishing house in Prague. For next to nothing, but that's because. But I also the contract. I mean, the contract's one of the things that you look at when you negotiate is how long do you have to do it. So I'm translating this novella. I said, I want 1.5 years to do it rather than the 3 or 4 months that it would take me if I just did it straight through. Mm-hmm. And I worked on it. I got a residency and worked on it in Banff, Canada for 3 weeks last summer. So that was sort of, a type of compensation that I wasn't getting from the publishing house. And it's a book that I really believe in from the mid-1950s, an era where there's only been, one other book translated from Czech into English before. Uh-huh. The writing is, exceptional. I mean, it depends, I don't think there's any translator who, maybe if you are, I don't know. I don't want to name names. There may be some people at the very top who simply refuse to work for less than a certain amount of money under any circumstances.
The reason I'm asking really is just to get a sense from the so the rate for the UK one is the £90 per 1,000 words, which is at this moment in time approximately. Is it at this moment in time on the exchange rate is approximately $135 per 1,000 words, and I just wondered where you sit within that. If there was going to be such a guideline of we have found that U.S. publishers are prepared to pay in the region of $135 per 1,000 words. Does that seem extraordinarily, or does that seem true to you, or off base? This is a question for you too, Tom, because you probably know more too.
Yeah, I know we paid at Penguin. Was around 140. I think that was what we generally offered to translators, and it might have changed. I haven't been there for 6 or 7 years, but it's been like 5 years. Anyway, I, in my experience, never had anyone balk at it. So I guess in retrospect, it was a pretty good rate. And from what Alex is saying, I guess it is at least a little a little higher than average, perhaps. I mean, it was Penguin after all. And the Penguin contracts do, by default, stipulate for royalties, which is good. The classics, at least, your name will always be on the cover. What I'm wondering about is, like, what did Lydia Davis get for?
Oh, yeah.
I wonder if that's like it's not even a rate. It's like a straight up,
Well, that's the other thing. There are publishers that do that. I mean, I've signed contracts where it wasn't a rate per word. It was just a fixed amount. Yeah.
We've been doing that with some things at times recently in particular, but usually do the rate too. And usually gets to between 100 and 125. Usually don't do 140, seems high.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the benefit of our listeners, though, since we've all experienced this in various ways for varying amounts of time, too, but not everyone that's listening has, what does that mean then? So for your rate, Alex, if it's $135 per 1,000 words, we'll say, that's just like the average thing. What does that translate into for a book and for the amount of time that you put into that book? And granted, there are different types of books. So let's try and get something that's not like extremely obtuse and is going to require you to spend 2 years hunting down information, and not something that's literally like that you could toss off in an afternoon. But your average book.
Well, I'm going to back up for just a second.
Okay.
It's still on the same topic, but just because in addition to the model contract from the Penn Translation Committee, we also have a set of FAQs.
Right.
And one of them is, I've been asked by a publisher to do a translation. What sort of compensation should I ask for? And we cite here the English Pen suggests this fee of no less than 88.5 pounds per 1,000 words. As you just said, they've recently raised it to 90.
Right.
And what we write here is this falls in the middle of the range of rates reported by our members.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we worded it there. So, if we're saying that's about 13.5 cents a word, so our members at Penn, and Penn, of course, is translators who've published at least one book. To be a member of Penn, you have to have published at least a book.
I really love that it was 88 pounds per 1,000 words, which in 2014 was $148 per 1,000 words, which now is only $135. So,
we have
America.
I have to update that. Yeah. But yeah, so the rates that in the middle of the range of rates reported by our members, that means our members are reporting from 9 to 18 cents a word or so, which is about what when I talk to my friends and colleagues, that's about I guess what people are getting, 9 to 18. Personally, I would say I could not afford to work. 10 cents a word for me, I would really balk at that.
Okay.
Although, again, I said I took this job translating this novella for Charles University Press, but that was, an exceptional project under, different circumstances.
Right.
I mean, again, contracts, it always depends. How much time do I have to do it? How difficult is it, et cetera, et cetera?
That's why I want to try and get this, make this as concrete as possible for people, so they have as full of an understanding of what happens in this business as possible by the end of here. So even if we'll stick with the 135 for right now, a normal book. What does that end up meaning? Like, do you have how long are we going to make a normal book? How many months is it going to take you? What does that actually end up being in dollars?
Right. Okay. So in dollars, well. I think that blog post I wrote, I figured out my rate was about getting like $15 an hour.
But before we get to hours,
what do you the total amount of money for a book?
Yeah, what are you guys using as a normal? What would you use for a normal word count range? Well, if I get 15 cents,
a novella is maybe 30,000, 40,000 words, upwards of, I don't know what other people call the difference between a novella and a novel. A long novel is 100,000 words. Maybe a normal one is 80,000. So, if I'm getting 15 cents a word and the novel is 80,000 words, then I'm getting, $12,000, right?
Right. Okay, so $12,000 for that normal novella. 80,000 words is like what are we going to say? How many pages is that? Just to give people that sense. 300.
I've got a book here that I did, which was exactly that. Which is where I pulled that from. Maybe more like 250. It depends on, of course.
Yeah, the layout. So Okay, so 250 to 300 page book. You'll get $12,000 to translate that approximately. How long does that book usually take you to do?
80,000 words is definitely going to take me at least 6 months.
And how much time are you working on it during those 6 months?
Well, I'm talking about like more or less a full-time.
40 hours a week?
Yeah.
It's a significant amount of time.
I mean, there are people who work faster than I am.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
than I do. The fastest I've ever done a book, I think I did. There's Patryk Orzednik books for Dalkey Archive Press, which were pretty short, and I think I did one of those in like 3 months, and those were in the, somewhere between 30 and 40,000 words.
Yeah, but this seems perfect. Okay, so it took you 6 months to do this, which is approximately 960 hours of work, which under the scale would add up being to $12.50 an hour.
Yeah.
And if it did take you 6 months full time, you could reasonably assume to do 2 books a year if you had the demand for that, which would get you $24,000 a year.
Yeah, although I do think it's also important to say that as the translator, I'm not just translating the book, right? I'm also going through all the time that I spend in editing it with the editor.
Right.
And then I'm going through it with the copy editor. And then I'm going through it with the proofreader. And I'm not being paid for any of that time.
Right. So like, yeah, exactly. And then so doing 2 books a year under this guise is pretty much like the maximum you could be expected to do. And even that would be strained in certain ways because you'd be spending a lot of time, depending on what it is, a lot of time with the editor, a lot of time with marketing, a lot of time with other things, which sort of like I'm just going to group it all together to point out that this is a fairly dismal scenario for people who are just getting into translating and might be listening to this and going like, oh, well, here's like one of the top Czech translators in the country, and this is what their pay rate is, and they end up getting, they could work for $24,000 a year.
Yes.
Okay. So that's that.
Wait, can we also point out that authors don't make money?
Oh, absolutely.
Like if your book is being published as a paperback original from New Directions, I mean, granted, we're doing it in translation, so you've in theory gotten paid from your native country's publisher. Like Laszlo makes,
you're right,
made. He's able to live. He's able to write full time and be a professional writer, but largely based on his German publications, not his New Directions publications.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not going to give out the amounts, but it's pretty minor. It's about what you're talking about for the one project. That's the high end of what we pay.
Yeah.
And so if you're an American and you're published by let's say $2 Radio. You're lucky to get that much money as well. And you could have spent years working on that. And then you're going on a tour and you're giving, readings. And again, you're going through the editing process and all of this sort of stuff and marketing process and giving interviews and all of your time that is taken up. And, it's very self-promotional and, that shouldn't necessarily mean that you should be compensated for it. The point being to make, let's say $10,000 or $15,000, you're giving up a lot of time and effort. But this is what art is, right? I mean, you could toil away for decades and not get recognized. And then all of a sudden, all the hard work pays off. I mean, it is what it is. It's what we choose, those of us who choose it. And, to complain about the financial aspects only when you're neck deep in it just seems kind of wrong. Like, be aware, we're all aware of it going in. And it's just the way the situation is, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to the extent that everybody is aware of it going in, I agree. And I think that the reason that the work of the Penn Translation Committee is important is that actually not everybody is aware of it going in. And I will say, I'll speak for myself, it took me a long time to get savvy to what I needed to look for in a contract. And to the extent that we talk about it, people know. But I think, most... Again, I'm not going to speak for authors, and I agree that authors are very much in the same boat, Tom, no doubt about it. But that a lot of translators really are very unaware, uneducated going into, their first book and really have no idea at all about what a contract should have, does have, what are the kinds of, issues that are at stake. So it's just, my main point is that it's important to talk about it. I mean, I also have personal opinions about, sustainability of culture in the United States, and there are obviously much larger issues here. And Chad, talks about these things all the time, and articles he writes, and blog posts he does, and panels he's on, and we see this debate being played out on this world stage, with Amazon at the center and other arts too. It's not just, literature. What is sustainable? Is it sustainable for artists to be dependent on corporate sponsorship? Is it sustainable for artists to be supported only on grants? Do artists have the right to earn a living wage like doctors, lawyers, and, web designers? These kinds of issues.
These are all complex issues. And
yeah, so all that too. Like, also the people working in publishing aren't making a ton of money either. So is that
right.
Which was going to be my next question, just to continue to contextualize this for our listeners, is with one of these books, how much money are we really talking about with one of these books? So we have the we're looking at from the individual payment perspective of the author and of the translator and even of the employees who are involved with it. You could get into that, but we're talking about say a Czech book that's 300 pages, that's relatively well reviewed and whatever. What is our range of copies that we're actually going to sell of this?
2,500.
Okay, so 2,500. We'll say
that's how many will get printed, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So
you can expect to sell those over a 5-year period.
Okay.
If the publisher is doing a good job of it, yeah. I mean, it depends.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll qualify that statement by saying not all publishers will be able to sell 2,500 copies with all books that they do that fit into this. But
right.
We're just going to use this number for fun here. How much is that book going to cost?
Yeah. How much does it cost you to print it?
No. Let's wait for that. How much are you list pricing it at, Tom? Are you saying it's a paperback?
Yeah. How many pages did you say?
300.
That'd be about $16.95, I guess.
You want to go up to $16.95? Okay.
I think that's the trend. Let's
okay. So that's fine. That works for me. I'm gonna, if it ends up with dots or with decimals, I'm rounding it. So with that, if we sold 2,500 copies of that book at $16.95, that is $42,375 before anything, just as revenue.
You gave me 12,000.
Okay, so but wait, that 42,000 is a bullshit number too, because half of that has to go away in the discount.
Yes, at least half.
To booksellers. So that brings it down to just about. I'll just keep doing it as half, just because that's easy, Tom. It's $21,187.50.
Give it to me.
Okay, so you're going to get 12,000 as a translator. You're going to get 12,000, right? So your 12,000 brings us down to $9,187.50. Tom, how much would it cost to print 2,500 copies of this book, do you think?
About $6,000, $7,000, somewhere in there.
We'll say 6,000 just as we got a good deal or whatever. That's $3,187.50 that's left over, and we haven't paid the author, our distributor, or employees yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a losing proposition.
Yeah. I just want to bring that one home really hard for anyone listening, that we've talked about it, but I think we might have shorthanded it a lot of times. Whereas that, then you end up paying your distributor in the range of 20+% of your net receipt. So that automatically takes out a chunk. Your author is going to get some thousands of dollars. And then if we do get a grant, we generally get grants if you're a nonprofit, which you guys, New Directions, would be screwed under this as a losing proposition, most definitely. You could get a grant from the Czech government, say, to help offset some of Alex's costs, but say that's usually half of it. So say you get $6,000 back, you're still having to pay for your office, your employees, your everything. So it's not I think the point that I was thinking about in terms of this is that it is dismal, and I think that it's important to have the pen translation, the thing that the translation committee is doing, the work with the contracts, the awareness of it. But I get the feeling sometimes that there's sort of this underlying unspoken thing that someone's making off with a lot of money. And no one is making off with a lot of money here.
Oh, yeah. It's not my belief that somebody's making off with a lot of money. I mean, I'll just speak for myself personally here. To me, again, I know maybe it sounds grandiose, but to me, the numbers that you just cited, the numbers that Tom is talking about, to me, this is important to talk about because it shows how you cannot treat cultural you cannot treat culture the way that you treat refrigerators. And, that a lot of the things that we as human beings in this society really need to feel like human beings, we need culture, cannot be supported solely on the basis of supply and demand in the market. There needs to be some kind of support for it. It's not enough just to say, well, if it didn't make money, it's not worth doing.
And this is the motivation in some sense behind, like, one of the more negative aspects of this would be, as the publisher, I could look at these numbers and just be like, you know what, Alex, no, I'm going to pay you $2,000. If you can't translate it, I'll find a student who will do it for me.
Yeah. Or,
and then I've saved $10,000.
Shut down all the publishers. all the publishers would just have to shut down, right? And we all know that there are publishing houses that are being run at a loss on an ongoing basis, simply because, there are the person or people behind it have decided they want to keep it going. The culture is that important to them. But I just think it's important for us to know, I agree that it's going on. But there is obviously increasing pressure on, again, all sorts of cultural projects. Artists and writers are working with less and less money all the time. It's happening to journalists because of the internet. More and more people are being expected to work for free.
Yeah.
In return for exposure. What is that exposure supposed to get you? It's supposed to get you work, but if the work isn't paying your, living, then what's the point? You know what I mean? So it's. I think there are just really a lot of big issues at stake here. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know where to go from there.
I certainly don't walk around thinking that publishers are getting rich off of my labor. That's not my.
No, I don't. I'm not accusing you of thinking that either. I don't want it to come across that way. I just mean, like, in some discussions about this, when we start talking about rates and the underpayment of translators, there's like should be an asterisk of like the whole system is a little bit jacked, and like nothing's quite right, and like I don't know how we make that. Right.
That's why I like to connect it to the larger world of culture and other arts. It's not just translators. It's not just literature. I agree.
If we're selling 10,000 copies of every book of these, all these numbers become a lot more doable.
Yeah.
Can I just point out how many people live in this country? 300 million? Is that?
I think it's like 380, isn't it? It's over 300 million now.
340 now.
Okay. Yeah. So more than 300 million.
Okay, let's say half of those are adults or read in English.
322 million.
All right, so 100. Let's roughly say 150 million people who are potential readers of a book like this. We're selling 2,500 copies. I mean, the numbers are staggering. When you look at a book that, by the way, Chad and I, how did this come up? I forget what we were talking about, but. In the last podcast, but a book that gets you. We were talking about Zuckerberg's book club and how many it sold, and we were like, that puts you on the bestseller list. Being on the New York Times bestseller list requires sales of about $2,000 or 3,000 copies a week. Puts you on that. If you do that for a year, you're still only selling 100,000 copies.
Yeah,
and this is a country of hundreds of millions of people, and that's how many copies of books we're selling.
This is why it'd be better to just make apps.
Yeah.
So just to put that
how many people go through the Museum of Modern Art in a week?
Hold on, I'm going to drive this home real quick for you, Tom, with those numbers. 150 million people. If to sell 250,000 copies, you have to sell one book to every 60,000 people.
It's like a whole city.
Yeah, literally one book to every 60,000 people. You will sell 2,500.
You're asking me how many people go to MoMA? I'm going to look this up if I can, but
yeah. I think this stuff is fascinating, no?
I mean, just as somebody who works in New York and literally across the street from the Met.
Yep. Or the Met.
There's a lot of people.
That's for sure.
But the Met is more like Penguin Classics, and I chose MoMA because it's more like contemporary literature.
2.5 million people a year.
Damn.
Do they all pay?
If they don't doesn't it get underwritten? It gets underwritten in some way.
It's $25 to go to MoMA,
yeah. And it is free from Friday from 4 till 8 p.m.
I don't think most people plan their visits that way.
No. And Uniqlo probably is sponsored by them, so that money probably still gets factored into there. That's like 48,000 people a week going there.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, the number of people going in and out of the Met every day, it's mind-boggling. And, if all those people just bought a book, in addition to doing that...
It's cheaper than admission.
It is. And it will take you longer to read it.
Well, I think that is... I was going to point this out. Going to MoMA, going to the Met, you don't really need to know all that much about art. You can just kind of walk in, and there are placards on the wall that will explain things, and you can just stand in front of a painting, and it might be one of the most valuable, most important pieces of art in the world, and you can look at it and say, yeah, I don't like it, and walk away. It's not forcing you to engage in it in the way that literature does. And, it can be difficult to engage in a book, especially if you have no knowledge of the cultural, historical context. Translated stuff tends to be like that. So I can understand why people go for the easy option. I mean, look, there's no shortage of people going to see the Avengers, or buying comic books. That's an easier form of art to consume.
So here's the devil's advocate argument.
Okay.
Actually, we have too many books in translation in English, and publishers can't make any money on them. So publishers should limit themselves to publishing only those books that they can actually make money on, and there should be much more effort, time, financial backing put into getting those books to the people who really want and will appreciate them.
Isn't that what happens, though?
No.
In a practical way?
No. Because there's a lot of, I don't know what the right term is here, a lot of chaff published on the side. I mean, New Directions publishes 30-some-odd books a year. And, you ask a dedicated reader by the end, they're going to know 5 of them, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, what if we only spent all our time and money publishing those 5?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I get it. If we all put all of our efforts into that, this is not unlike the 12 books or whatever that publisher is called, where they publish one a month and they put literally all their efforts into one book at a time, which is not true because on the back end it's more complicated. But in terms of marketing and publicity, everything gearing up for 1 month, everything goes into this one book. And it works, but not every book was a hit.
Maybe most publishers are too big.
I'm thinking of it in somewhat of a different light than what you're saying. What you're saying, I completely agree with. But like on a practical level, as a book starts doing better, you tend to put more time and effort into that. So like on a structural level at a larger publisher, some of the lower books that aren't selling as well aren't going to get quite as much attention a month onwards as something that the Thomas Piketty book or whatever. You know what I mean? In that sense. So, like, in some ways, the market does end up, like, forcing your hand a bit. But I don't think that doing books that aren't in translation are that much cheaper.
Also agree. But to finish up this point, Alex, what you were talking about, like, doing a book that costs next to nothing and or you're getting paid next to nothing because you really believe in the book, this sort of ties into what you were saying about the rights reverting to the translator, because 3 books later, 3 translations later, that author becomes popular and the backlist starts selling. This is also the mission of New Directions. I mean, we stick with authors. We did 3 books with Laszlo before, Satan Tango really caught on and attracted attention.
Yeah.
You have to be committed. You're going to take a loss on those 3 early books, and you have to stay committed. And that's why you publish not just the 5 that you can sell right then and there in that year, in that fiscal year. That's why you publish the other ones on the side that you do. And, you're aware of the limitations in the market, but you do it anyway. And then you try to, it's a much longer term process that you have to stay committed to. Otherwise, I mean, there are a lot of publishers, and I'm not going to name them because they do some good books, but this is like, the one and done sort of model of publishing, not just with translations, but everything with, the focus on culture and debut novelists, and they're just trying to get the fast buck.
To sort of bring that home, wasn't the first Laszlo book, didn't that come out from Harcourt Brace?
Did it?
I might be wrong about this. I might be thinking of Marias.
Yes, Marias, we were the second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was an example of the one and done.
New Directions is a fantastic publisher, and when I've heard Barbara Epler speak, I've heard her say, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, that one of the things, I mean, obviously it's been around for a while, so but she talks about the fact that it's got the strong backlist, which enables the publishing house to be able to bring out 5 Krasnohorkai books at a loss before one that makes up for the others. So I mean that's a great position to be in. But I will say I really like that idea. And right now, for instance, there's an author, Petra Hulova, whose first novel I did for Northwestern University Press back in 2009. It won the National Translation Award in 2010. I haven't been able to sell another book of hers since, and she's written 8 novels now, and she's 35 years old. But when I am going to publishers now, what I'm saying to them is, I would really like to find a publishing house that is committed to publishing this author, not just this book. And I do think that that's, one way that a publishing house can be more successful, both financially and culturally. And I think, of course, different literatures have different standings. And, the Czech literature is at a disadvantage compared to, say, French literature, where, people don't grow up knowing much about it. So I think part of the reason that people are more familiar or more likely to buy a book that's translated from French or Spanish or German is that it seems less foreign to them relative to Czech. And if you only ever get one book by each author, you have one book by Petra Hulova and one book by Josef Jedlička and one book by, Magdalena Placová. There's no kind of idea of who these authors are, but when you get several books coming out, people begin to form an idea of the author and how they fit into the culture. And I think, a lot of people do connect to literature that way. And I really like that. I don't want to call it a model of publishing. I don't think that's the right term, but that approach, I guess.
I have 3 statements. One is, Tom, I was thinking of the quartet version, which apparently came out in 1989 for Krasnohorkai, but that was only the UK version. Right. So that one doesn't count. It was Marias is the one that was published and then dropped, and that you guys obviously made a good success out of. The 2 things I was thinking of. One was, do you still run into publishers, Alex, that don't give you back the rights to your translation if it goes out of print, like if that they're copyrighted it in their name and retain that? And then secondly, a follow-up that is much broader and much more complicated is that in this age, it seems like we have more and more every year, according to our database, more and more publishers doing, and we're just talking about fiction and poetry here in translation, but more and more publishers doing that. However, a greater number of them are smaller presses. Did you get the sense that it's easier for you to find a place for a lot of books because of this resurgence? We tend to talk of it in the sense that things are growing and more books are being made available. There's more interest generally in translation. Or do you have a problem that, yes, there are more people who are doing this, however, that hasn't changed your specific authors that you're working on? And when it does, these are presses that are starting out on literally a shoestring and can't even afford your going rate, so it's not helping you financially.
Yes. It's not helping me. So the first question, yes, I still have come across contracts recently that don't have a reversion of rights clause in them at all. The first thing, I don't usually assume that it's not there because they want to screw me over. I assume it's not there because they just don't know about it. I mean, I had a contract sent to me by a publishing house, and just to see what they would say about it, sent it to the Authors Guild lawyers to review, and was interested in what the lawyer there said. And when I wrote back to him, I said, at Penn, we, really advocate for there being a reversion of rights clause, and this is why, for the reason we were saying before. And he's like, oh, I didn't think of that. And yeah, maybe we'll start, saying that to translators when they send us contracts from now on. So I think it's one of those issues that just hasn't been on people's radar. And again, I think, maybe publishing houses, or they're lawyers. It's not the editors who are drawing up the contracts normally. They probably just don't even think about it, this reversion of rights issue.
Well, I guess that's that to clarify a question a bit or make it a little bit more direct. Then if you've asked anyone and said like, oh, you don't have the reversion of rights clause, it's a normal thing. Are there presses still that you're running into are like, hell no, we're not giving that to you?
No, they've all said, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And as to the second question, I think it really does matter which language you're translating. The translation, landscape market definitely needs to be, disaggregated for those of us who work in smaller languages. It's not the same for me as it is for somebody who translates from not even just a language that's spoken by more people and whose literature is more familiar to readers, but that gets more support from the state institutions. I think one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, that French literature is perennially the one that's translated the most is because of the backing for it from French cultural institutions, the support of translations, and ditto for German. And then Spanish, of course, is coming from so many different countries that there are multiple routes to take. Russian actually getting a lot of support. And then we've seen, from your databases that, in any given year, if a country decides to put a lot of money into grants for translations, then all of a sudden the number of books being translated from that language spikes. So the general increase in visibility of translations and popularity of translated literature has not made a big difference to me as a Czech translator. For me personally, it's a question of meeting editors and them getting to know me and my work. And, I've noticed that the translators who publish the most often are the ones who have standing relationships with editors and publishing houses, where they've found a publishing house with an editor whose taste is similar, and they know that translator is not only an excellent translator but also good to work with, turns things in on time, turns them in clean, isn't going to freak out if they miss a deadline. They let them know in advance. All those kinds of things that make somebody a pleasure to work with as opposed to a pain in the ass.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm not complaining, but Czech is definitely an underdog compared to, again, French or Spanish or German. There are definitely languages that are underdogs compared to Czech too. I'm very aware of that.
Yeah, that's true.
Can I? The French take a lot of bashing on this front, and I would just like to point out that the reason the French put so much money and effort and resources into the promotion of their culture is that they value that culture. They value the arts.
Who's bashing them?
We should all applaud them.
Who's bashing? I'm not bashing. I'm saying.
No, I'm just saying it comes across. Okay. No, it's this whole underdog thing. It's like, well, the French have more translations because they this. It's like, well, no, they're doing what they believe in. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I hope I'm coming across as bashing. I'm not definitely not bashing the French. I'm just pointing out that it's when you look at it's difficult to talk about translation writ large because the situation is different for different languages. If I say Czech is an underdog, that doesn't mean I'm angry or resentful of French language stuff. I'm just saying it's a different landscape, different situation.
Wait, can I take the opportunity to bring up, Chad, this email I got from, once again, Doug Singleton from McNally Jackson?
Okay.
Do you remember this one?
The one that I remember is the one about not giving away spoilers.
No. So you actually replied to this, so you should remember. So Doug writes in that he was talking with Javier.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So Javier Malea is the Spanish language buyer and events coordinator, as well as just a general bookseller at McNally Jackson. And he was looking at these data from Typographical
Era.
Yes. No. Era? Yes, okay. There it is. It's all one word. I'm looking at a link. that there are many more French language translations than Spanish language translations, so the author pool and reading audience must be surely be far, far greater for Spanish language books. I'm not being facetious. I actually figure there's probably a rational region as regards French government subsidies or Spanish translations being sold through channels other than this group of publishers or something or not. It's been a topic of discussion, blah, blah, blah. And I replied and I said, we've talked about this before, and, that it has something to do with subsidies and the sheer aggression with which the French get their books into American editors' hands, but it is still baffling. And Chad, you wrote, this is way too long. Chad,
it's way long.
So what is your, and I'm not saying defense, what is your explanation of this bizarre phenomenon? And Alex, if you have any reference point or any inside knowledge or any, like you said, if you're like an underdog language to be translating from, and you definitely feel like the French and Spanish are the sort of heavyweights, but even the French are ahead of the Spanish. And
yeah. I think there was like two main points that I had. One being, the main one was that, and the one that I think that you're most focused on or want me to talk about, is the one that there are a lot of Spanish books that are being published, but they're not being professionally represented by agents or publishers. So frequently, like if there's a small press in Nicaragua that's publishing really interesting books from Nicaraguan writers, they may not be the people who are sending out catalogs to American editors or meeting with them at Frankfurt at drinks at some place talking about their new hot Nicaraguan author. Whereas French, since it's been such a hub for literature and a hub for language and a hub for art for such an extraordinarily long time, has a really professionalized and systematic way of representing their books. So there is like all the promotions that they do with the grants, the Hemingway grants, the grants for the from the CNL, the whatever it is, Centre National Libres, or however you say it in French instead of Spanish, and the different things that they do to promote the authors, bringing them on tours, like all of that kind of stuff, and that all does, I think, help. But there's also the sense of like, where certain editors that are bigger editors are connected to each other at these sort of places. And I think the French are particularly good, as are the Germans, at representing their country's literature in a way that's in a form that's digestible and that makes sense to editors that are considering it for translation. Like, I mean, Spanish is a crazy one because there's just so many books and there's so many areas and so many locations that everyone runs a little bit differently. There's a lot of Argentine books that we've done that are by like very small presses that you get from that individual place versus like a big agent that's like Carmen Balcells that's representing like the big name authors from the Spanish language world. But if you think about like places like China or Japan that have, or South Korea that have sort of a different way of dealing with this that doesn't always line up exactly with what an editor wants here, it's going to sort of restrict them in a way, was one of my points. There's a structural problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I agree. That's all.
But actually, speaking of Czech, we don't get approached by very many Czech publishers.
No.
There's one publisher and one agent that I meet with on a regular basis. I think that might be it.
Edgar?
No.
Dana Blatna.
Yeah.
There's only two.
Yeah.
There's Dana Blatna, and who's Czech and is in Czech Republic, and there's Edgar de Bruin, who is Dutch.
Oh yeah, I know him too.
He
Yeah.
translates from Czech into Dutch, but he is the other person who represents a significant number of Czech authors' foreign rights.
Right.
Yeah. He goes to Frankfurt. I think Dana does too. Yep.
Can I ask Alex, along these lines, what, if anything, Penn does to sort of level this playing field a little bit?
Well, we have limited levers at our disposal. The thing that Margaret and I are working toward right now is to get better outreach on the application process for the Penn-Heim Translation Fund grants, which is a really important way to promote translations both by up-and-coming translators, but also from languages or cultures that have not typically been as widely exposed. So we haven't figured out exactly yet how to do it, but what's valuable about those grants is that although they the amount of support is from $2,000 to $4,000. So based on what we just said, that's not usually going to cover the full cost of translating a book. And the grants are made to individual translators rather than to publishers. But the prestige of the grants and the fact that there are publishers on the advisory panel that awards the grants means that I think the last time that
I just looked this up too.
They ran statistics that something like 68% of the books that translations that won PEN/Heim Fund grants did find a publisher. So I think to the extent that we can get, more books from Arabic, more translators from Arabic applying for those grants from, Indonesian, whatever languages that are out there that have, strong and valuable literature but typically have been overlooked. If they apply for and then they get a PEN grant, it definitely increases the chance, astronomically increases the chance that they'll be published. I know New Directions did a book from Indonesian recently, right?
No, it comes out in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know if that one won a PEN/Heim Fund grant?
I think it did. And as you know, I don't think she's on it anymore, but I think Barbara did find the person.
Yeah.
I think she did it for 3 years and she's done.
Uh-huh. But so that's the main again, since we're all volunteers, the PEN American Center doesn't have paid staff working on translation, so that's not something that they have the resources to work on. But that's our main lever to work on that issue.
Interesting. I always thought you guys got tons and tons of applications for that.
But that was my impression too. I mean,
I don't know. I haven't this year. Actually, I'll be on the panel, so I'll get to see where the applications are coming from. But I don't know up to now. One of the other thing we'd like to do is have more of that data published. I mean, again, our biggest obstacle is people power, to have enough people to put all this information together and get it published and out there. It's just it's a question of having people to do it.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. I don't mean this to be too critical, but yes, PEN would do better to update their website more often, especially as regards these kinds of things.
Yep, I agree. We're doing the best we can. We've updated it a lot in the last 6 months. I don't know if you've noticed. There's been a lot of work on the pen.org translation page. I can't speak for the rest of the site. I have no influence over that.
Well, I think in general it is like they need to hire a couple more people and, get these things.
They have.
Have they? Good.
Yeah, they just got a new editorial assistant. They got they're aware.
Okay, good. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we've provided our listeners with somewhat better understanding of the crazy mess financially and ideologically that is translating and publishing translated works. Chad, do you have anything else to add?
We may have depressed everyone.
True.
I don't think so. I do have a rave now, though, for my rave.
You got a rave.
I do. I have my rave, and it ties into this perfectly, so I'm going to do it right now. Is the typographical era link that you're talking about is the 2015 Visual Guide to Translated Fiction by publisher. Man, I looked at it briefly when I first saw it, but it's fun to look back through it right now. It's insane. It's like 5 covers. It's a cover of every single book that they've identified that's coming out in translation that's fiction. I think that they use part of our database to start this maybe, but I think there are things on here that I don't have listed yet. At least they don't ring a bell with me. But it's interesting to see it visually as each one of the books, it has a little cover, 5 to a row, and it goes on for pages because there are a lot of books. I mean, even if we say there's not very many, I mean, most people read like 4 books a year, right? So like seeing a list of 200 translations is kind of daunting, but it's cool to look at the covers and also to pick out ones that look just crappy or like fit a certain thing. And other ones that don't. Like, I don't like this cover of the, if you guys are looking at this is organized by title, The City of Blood. Paris homicide mystery is like the Eiffel Tower in the background with like a police line, do not cross in the foreground, and like a blood
store. Hold on. Do you know who translated those?
I don't know who translated. Oh, translated by Jeffrey Zuckerman.
Yes, he did. So
Really? From
Yeah.
music and literature?
Yeah. He's translating a Antoine Boulodine book for us, too.
yeah. Hey, you got to pay the bill somehow, right?
It's from the French book. I don't mean the book itself. Like, I have no idea what that's about. But that cover is kind of awful.
There's actually, I think there are 2 that they've done so far in that series that are related. Like it says like book 2 of the Paris murder mysteries or something like that. They're both awful. They're just really, really terrible.
Where some of these covers are really cool, and they're books I might not have otherwise like paid attention to or even thought of, but some of the covers are really grabbing. I'm trying to find one now. Of course I said that. Now it's like that one that was over there somewhere that I'm not finding. The Tesla one's a cool cover. I'm down with that. Suppose. But I like it. I like it being visual like this, and that you can click through, and it just goes to the I believe it goes to the Amazon page with each one, but you can at least click through and see more information about the book right away. And when you scroll over it, it highlights what the title is and who translated it. This is a very slickly made page.
Yep. I like it. Yeah, he's doing some great stuff. Aaron.
Yeah. I really like him too.
Is it just Aaron
I
Westerman?
think there's another person. There's a woman who's involved as well, and I can never remember what her name is. Yeah, so you have a rant?
Yeah, I might as well rant about the thing that has been bothering me for the last, what day is today? Monday? So almost a week. I've been just ranting to anyone that'll listen to me about this. So my girlfriend and I were in Texas last week. We got back yesterday. 4 days in Marfa, which is in the middle of nowhere, literally middle of nowhere, from about 6 hours west of San Antonio, 3 hours southeast of El Paso, and about an hour north of Big Bend National Park and all of that sort of interest. It's, about as far from civilization as you can get. Yep. And Marfa is something of a artsy sort of resort vacation town. And for good reason. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. But it is mainly, for lack of a better term, on the map because the New York artist Donald Judd moved out there in the 60s and really started going crazy on his land art and large-scale outdoor sculptures and things like that.
Is that where the Lannan Foundation also has its...
It is.
The Lannan Foundation is out there as well. They have residencies. They're totally updated. But so there's a Judd Foundation and a Chinati Foundation. Chinati is where all of Judd's artwork lives and exists and will be preserved for as long as possible in, the conditions in which he left it when he died. And here is where I get to my rant, because in addition to that, they have also, look, and it's by virtue of his will, but in his will, he stipulated that everything should be left exactly as it was when he died to be preserved, as a sort of museum. And now this is fine. His studio, I understand this sort of thing, but it also includes like his house and, his personal library and his kitchen and things like this, which really have nothing to do with his art. And it's just that he sort of created a shrine to himself. And it's just such a male ego trip sort of thing. And it just really got under my skin that, it's also like just how much space it takes up. Just hundreds and hundreds of acres devoted to, this artwork. And he's like, this is how much space my art deserves and that sort of thing. And I'm not saying it's not good art. It's really like this egocentric sort of thing to say to somebody and to your heirs and to the people you've left in control of your art, say, I want you to leave everything literally the way it is. Don't touch a thing. And that's that. And the worst part is like people go along with it. Like there are people employed to keep everything sort of preserved. And I don't know. It just seemed a little egocentric to me. It made me very uncomfortable to like be visiting a shrine to one human being. I don't know. Not sure. It requires much more exploration, but it just seemed like a really gross display of the male ego, the male artistic ego, certainly. So
I think that was more of an objection than a rant, Tom.
Yeah, well, when you meet people from there who really love Judd, it seems like a rant.
Yeah, I believe that.
That said, go to Marfa. It's well worth it.
Is that your first time there?
In Marfa, yes. In Texas, no. But it's really great. It's definitely worth a visit. I will say.
Sorry.
Go on.
Where was Big Shot? The James Dean.
That is it. We stayed in the hotel where that was shot, actually.
That's also Marfa.
Giant is the name of the movie.
Giant, thank you.
We said Big. I was thinking of Tom Hanks, and then it took a minute there to recalibrate.
Bad translation.
Anyway, yeah, we had the option of staying in the James Dean room.
Oh, really?
Or he stayed for another $50.
And you didn't do it.
No, my girlfriend was like, well, what's different? And she's like, nothing. The room just is where James Dean is. There's nothing different about the room.
They preserved.
So we passed on that. I will say we went into this bar. And Chad, you do karaoke. You'll appreciate this. So we're eating dinner, and the bartender.
I like that little insert.
So the bartender at this restaurant tells us that we need to go to another bar because they have this, it being Texas after all, alternative sort of karaoke once a month, and tonight was the night, and we needed to go. And that turned out to be a bit of an overstatement. It wasn't all that crowded or anything like that. But we walk in, and I'm standing there, and I'm waiting for my beer. And there's a little, a hand-drawn sketch of a cowboy with an eye patch on, right? Black and white, just like a charcoal sketch, this old, grizzled sort of cowboy with his 10-gallon hat on and an eye patch. Not 10 seconds later, that very man, presumably the owner, walked right by me, standing next to the drawing. It was this weird, David Lynchian sort of moment or whatever. But anyways.
That is awesome. There's a guy who donated money to one of the rooms on campus, and as part of that the room's named after him, there's a painting of him on the wall, but the perspective of the painting is very weird, in which it makes his hand look gigantic, bigger than any other human hand in history. And I've seen him before, and that was the first thing I looked for, was to see if he had some gigantic hand. That maybe it wasn't the badness of the painting, but actually that he just had some freakishly large fingers. Thankfully he didn't. Oh God. Okay, guys. I've got another student coming in 8 minutes. Today is the busiest day of my life. But we've also talked for an hour and 15 minutes about this. So, anyone have any final thoughts that they want to throw in there?
I hope I survived the blizzard. That's all I have to say.
Has it started? I meant to ask you.
Oh,
that.
yeah. It's
you
down.
both are there too. Yeah, I forgot.
It's coming down sideways. Yeah.
Sideways here too. Brooklyn. Sideways in Brooklyn.
Yes.
You're in Manhattan right now, Tom?
No, I'm in Brooklyn at home. Clinton
Sideways.
Hill.
CNN has a lot to say to you guys about staying home and whatever. It's not even snowing here, at all. I'm not supposed to get hit at all. So it's kind of lame to me. I like those storms.
Well, thanks for having me on the cast. And I'm sure Margaret would be happy to come on at some point, and you could get somebody from Alta. There's a lot of translators out there.
Very true. And we are having more people as guests more regularly, it seems now. Real quick, so you guys know, we recorded the music thing to go up on Thursday, so this will go up a week from Thursday, which, Tom, you and I will be in Asheville right after that. Do you want to just do our next one there, or did you want to do something in between?
We can do it there. I think we'll be able to find some time. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what you do during the day.
Well, I don't really have anything to do.
I don't either.
I have a few things I have to attend, but mainly my thing is the speed dating lunch bullshit. I
don't think I have to do anything except hang out and go to the one dinner. And
what's in Nashville?
It's the Winter Institute. For booksellers. We should do a podcast just on that, with Sparks. It's for all the booksellers to get together to discuss issues related to bookselling, and then additionally, if you're a sponsor as a publisher, you can come and present two. I believe it's always limited to two. Maybe it's not, but you could present 2 books or be involved with the dinner or do a thing where you can sponsor and talk to the booksellers individually. I think there's a limit too on how many booksellers can attend, like maybe 150. Does that sound right to you, Tom, or am I making that up?
When is your thing?
I don't remember right now because I'm just going and crashing as part of Consortium's dinner. I think their dinner is on Tuesday.
So no, this sounds like it's being limited by a consortium.
How many books that you have?
Yes.
Yeah, but I know there is a limit on.
That's something.
There used to be a limit on if you're a big publisher or whatever, you could only present X number of things or bring 2 authors. I think that's what it was. Bring 2 authors.
Oh, it's how many galleys you have in the room where all the galleys are and the authors. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know what the exact, but there's something to make it more condensed and targeted, and not just like everyone can bring everything that they want.
Yes, it is limited, and you're only allowed a certain number of employees too. So like you can't overwhelm by force that way either. Right.
Just to make it less make it more specific and all that kind of stuff. And the sponsorship levels are pretty significant too.
Right. Yeah, they're not cheap. It's a commitment, that's for sure.
I think it's isn't it like $5,000?
Anyway, I will be there. Yeah.
And we can hash this all out there.
Yes. Absolutely. Maybe we can get Sparks on the podcast. How about that? I'm sure he'd be down.
I think he would. I think that would be very entertaining.
Yes. And I forget who else. I have a whole list of all the booksellers that'll be here.
Do you get that as part of being a sponsor?
I do indeed.
That's cool.
Yeah. I get names and email addresses.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Are there, how many, that's what my question is, how many are there? So then I'll let you go.
A couple thousand?
A couple thousand?
Yeah.
But they're not all attending.
No. That's how many will be there.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Let's see. Why can't I find this? Bookstore.
That seems extraordinarily large.
560, let's say.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's manageable, I guess.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
All right. We're rambling, but we'll figure it out.
Yep, but we didn't have any sports things this time either.
Well, we're in the worst 2 weeks of any sports era in at the time of the year because the 2-week break between the Super Bowl and the last round of the playoffs.
Yeah.
So horrible. All they do is talk about fucking Tom Brady and his balls.
I think we should name this podcast "Fucking Tom Brady and His Balls."
really, really attract a different set of listeners.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you should post it under 2 different titles and see which one gets more traffic.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do that with one of our books. As an ebook version, is posted under 2 different titles with 2 different covers, and just see which one sells more. Mm-hmm. But okay, I'll let you guys go. I got to talk to this lady.
All right.
Okay. Thanks again, both of you.
Yep, same to you, man. Thanks for coming on.
When I tried the night